Welcome back to Infinity Learning. Today's video, we're going to be looking at sales and specifically one section of sales, something called the buying process. Now, the reason I wanted to do this video today, last week I was running a sales workshop for a company, and the people in the audience, I would say approximately half of them were transitioning into sales. So it was their first position in sales. They've been doing other things within the organization, and they were moving into sales roles of various degrees. And approximately the other half of the group were established salespeople, and the level of experience with the second half of the group varied from 1 or 2 years to up to I think the more experienced person was 12 and a half years. We'll round up, we'll say 13 years experience. And we have a really lively discussion with regards to how to get people to buy your product or your service. One of the things that I focused the group's attention on is something called the buying process, which is a psychological process that all of us go through when we are going to buy something. The more expensive the purchase is, the more we have to go through the psychological process and the longer the process takes us to go through. So, for example, if we were going shopping for food, our weekly shop or our monthly shop, the psychological process that we go through is very quick because the decisions that we need to take are relatively small. They will probably be recurring decisions. So I like cereal, and there's a particular brand of cereal that I like. So I don't need to spend a long time going through the process of which cereal I need to buy. I know which cereal I need to buy. I know the brand. I know how it tastes. So there is hardly any decision that needs to be made. I just go and I pick it up. If I'm going to buy something a lot more expensive than a packet of cereal, the thought process I need to go through is a lot longer. And this is what we mean when we talk about the buying process. Now, the buying process is a mnemonic, and the mnemonic is idea. IDEA. Now, each stage, and there's 4 stages, so the I, the D, the E, and the A. So there are your 4 stages. Now, each stage actually stands for something. So, for example, the I stands for interest. Now, it doesn't matter what your product or your service is. Your prospective customer needs to have a certain level of interest in your product or your service. So if we're looking at a numerical scale and 0, so I'll start over here. So 0, I have 0 interest in your product or your service. And 10 being, I'm going to bite your arm off. I absolutely love this product or this service. So let's start with the misconception when we talk about sales, and I'm talking about referring to salespeople. The misconception is that from a sales perspective is that I, as a potential customer, I need to have an interest level of 10 to be interested in your product or your service. That's not 100% correct. Adversely, okay, if my level as the prospective customer is 0, you've got no chance in selling, in continuing the conversation with me in regards to the product or the service. What I need as a prospective customer as long as my interest level, it doesn't have to be 10, but it can't be 0. So it can be 1, level 1. Now, that maps might sound counterintuitive because you might be thinking, hold on a minute, Paul, you can't do anything with someone's interest level at 1. Surely it's better if their interest level is 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Well, yes, in an ideal world, if that person has that level of interest for your product and service, then that's fantastic. The reality might be different. The reality might be that their level of interest needs cultivating. So it's not 0. So it's not I have 0 interest in this product or service, but it's okay, I haven't really thought about it, but I would be open to you telling me things that could benefit me. That's all that you need as somebody who is trying to understand. So if you're a salesperson and you are trying to understand um, what your customer is looking for and how you can best show or demonstrate the product or service that you have, how that meets and exceeds the needs of what your customer is looking for, that is a better fit. That is going to elevate the customer's level of interest in your product and service, rather than having a product or a service and trying to shoehorn or dovetail it into what your customer is potentially looking for. That's not a good fit. So our conversation was not a heated conversation. I like excited conversations. Our voices do get raised, not in a confrontational way, but the fact that our opinions are starting to go one above the other, and I like discussions like that because it gets the juices, creative juices flowing, and it gets people's opinions going. So one thing that came out of it was the introduction of finding out from the prospective customer what their needs actually are. What do they actually need? What do they actually want? Really getting into the nuts and bolts of what they are potentially looking for, what problems they are experiencing right at this very moment in time, and what would make their lives much more beneficial if, and the key word is if, your product or your service met or exceeded their needs and their wants. Once we started speaking about that, it started opening up a whole different level of dialogue. And one thing that dialogue focused on was interest, and how could we elevate someone's level of interest. One thing it demonstrated to the group is that salespeople are not very good at listening. They're very good at talking, but they're not very good at listening. So the first thing, when we talk about elevated levels of interest, the first key skill is actually listening to your prospective customer, listening to what they are telling you. And at the time that you are listening, I don't mean you are internally thinking. I mean you are really listening. So you are switching your brain off. So you're listening to specifically what your customer is saying to you. You are delving into, you're asking questions to fully understand what your customer is saying to you. You're not asking questions to eliminate certain possibilities and start to match features and benefits to your product or your service. No, you're literally listening really to get an understanding of what your customer is saying to you, understanding what their needs are, what their wants are, before you even contemplate trying to think whether your product or your service is going to be of benefit to your customer. Now, initially, when I first said this to the group, they were like, "Paul, you're absolutely crazy. We've heard that you're crazy, but now we know that you're crazy. Of course we listen." But what they found out is that they actually don't. They're listening for the answers that they want to hear to start the dovetailing process of, okay, I've heard what you've said, and this is what we can do to actually mirror into what you need. And then the customer would come back and say, well, actually, I didn't say that. I actually said this, and what you've just said to me doesn't benefit me in this regard. So it proved the point that, on the whole, okay, salespeople are not very good at listening. So when we talk about elevating someone's level of interest, the interest is actually taking the time to fully listen, ask questions to test your understanding of what you have heard, and repeating back to the customer exactly what their needs are. Not just their present needs, but testing their needs for the short term, the medium term, and the long term. So you get a really good picture as to what the current issues are now, what the current issues could be in the immediate future, or not the too distant future, and then looking about long-term needs. Once you've done that and the customer actually agrees with you, then starting to introduce, well, if we, and the key word is the if we could do this and this, would that satisfy your short-term needs? Okay, yes, it would. Okay, what about medium-term needs? Okay, if we're satisfying your short-term needs, that gets you over the hump in the short term, but relatively quickly we're going to get into the medium, and we haven't done anything to address the medium-term needs. So the medium-term needs could be X. Oh, okay, yeah, that actually makes sense. So just to recap, we could do for your short-term needs Y, and that you agree that would meet the needs of your short-term needs. Yes. However, if we don't do anything to start to address your medium-term needs, then relatively quickly, what we've done is we have addressed the short-term needs, but very quickly we've moved straight into the medium-term needs, and we haven't done anything to address that. This could also address your medium-term needs. Would you agree? Yes, it would agree. I would agree. And then your long-term needs, okay, again, the same thing will apply. If we don't, we've now got something for our short term and our medium term, but if we don't address the long term or think about the long term and have something to address the long term, what's going to happen is that we're going to lose sight of the long term. And relatively quickly, we're going to go from the short term, medium term, and then bang, hey presto, we're straight into the long term. So it's getting them to actually break down what these needs are, putting it into some sort of timescale. So now, when we take that approach, speaking to our prospective customers, we start to elevate their level of interest in talking about their needs, their wants, and their needs, rather than go straight into how we can solve all of their needs. The I of the buying criteria, the desire. Okay, desire is a stronger emotion than interest. So what impact does that desire going to have on their needs? Okay, so now it's not just interest, it's not just logical. We now are looking at a much stronger emotion. Let's stop it.